All right, today we are diving deep into the story of Nebraska. And let me tell you, it's a wild one. This is a state that started out at the bottom of a massive inland sea, became home to rhinos and camels, yeah, you heard that right, and then grew into the heart of a really unique American political movement. So let's jump right in. So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to cover 6 main parts of Nebraska's story. We'll start way back in prehistoric times, then look at the first peoples who lived there, cover the whole westward expansion craze, and then see how all the political and social changes created the state we know today. Okay, first up, let's rewind the clock. And I mean way, way back. Ever wonder what Nebraska looked like millions and millions of years ago? Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. Believe it or not, for millions of years, most of Nebraska was completely underwater. Yeah, back in the age of the dinosaurs, a huge inland sea called the Western Interior Seaway basically cut North America in half, and Nebraska was right at the bottom of it. And this timeline here really shows you just how dramatic that transformation was. I mean, first you have the sea during the Cretaceous. Then it slowly pulls back, leaving behind these thick forests and swamps. After that, boom, the Ice Age hits, and you've got these giant glaciers just grinding across the eastern part of the state. It was only after all of that, when the climate started to dry out, that the grassy plains we picture today finally formed. And the animals that lived here? Absolutely incredible. In that ancient sea, you had these massive swimming reptiles and giant fish. But what's really wild is what came after. Once the land dried out, Nebraska was home to stuff you would never expect. We're talking camels, tapirs, monkeys, even tigers and rhinoceroses, just roaming around what would become the Great Plains. Okay, so fast forward a bit. The ancient beasts are long gone and the land is ready for a new chapter. This is when people arrive, building these amazing, thriving cultures, and this is all centuries before any Europeans showed up. And for thousands of years, this land was home to many different indigenous groups. You can see from this table just how diverse it was. You had tribes like the Pawnee right in the center, the Omaha over in the northeast, and the Arapaho and Cheyenne out west. Plus, the Sioux used big parts of Nebraska as really important hunting grounds. Then, of course, the Europeans arrive. France is the first to claim it. They're even the first to write down a name that sounds like Nebraska. But here's a key moment. In 1720, a Spanish expedition tries to move in, and they get totally defeated by Pawnee and Odo warriors. That was a huge deal. So the land gets passed back and forth between France and Spain until finally, in 1803, the U.S. buys the whole thing in the Louisiana Purchase. So that Louisiana Purchase basically fired the starting pistol for American expansion. And by the middle of the 1800s, Nebraska wasn't just some territory on a map. It was the superhighway to the west. And a really crucial moment was the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This was the law that officially created the Nebraska Territory, drew that line in the sand with Kansas to the south, and basically just threw the doors wide open for settlers to come flooding in. But you gotta understand, the original Nebraska Territory was absolutely massive. I mean, it stretched all the way up to Canada and clear out to the Rocky Mountains. But over the next 10 years or so, it just kept getting carved up. Chunks were taken to create the Colorado, Dakota, and Idaho territories, until eventually Nebraska was left with the borders we see today, right when it became a state. And for all those thousands of pioneers heading west, the main route was right along the Platte River. And for them, a place like Fort Kearny was an absolute lifeline. Seriously, these weren't just forts. They were like the ultimate rest stop, offering everything from food and medical care to mail service, law enforcement, and even road repairs. All right, so becoming a state, well, it wasn't exactly a smooth ride. And once it finally was a state, Nebraska pretty quickly became the center of a powerful new political movement, one that was born directly from the struggles of its farmers. And here's a great piece of trivia for you. Nebraska is the only state ever admitted to the Union by overriding a presidential veto. See, the state's first constitution said only white men could vote. Congress wasn't having it and said they had to change that. President Andrew Johnson vetoed the whole thing, but Congress just went right around him, making history in the process. Okay, so after statehood, the railroads became the real engine driving settlement. And their sales pitch was, well, it was aggressive. Just look at this ad. They are literally promising people the best farming and stock raising lands in the world. They were not shy about it. And they made it almost impossible to say no. We're talking $5 an acre for prime farmland back in 1870 with really easy payment plans. You combine that with the free land from the Homestead Act, and what you get is a full-blown land rush. But here's the reality check. Life on the prairie was incredibly tough. Farmers were dealing with terrible droughts, huge debts, and crop prices that were just tanking. And they felt like the big political parties had totally abandoned them. So in Omaha, they decided to do something about it themselves. They formed the Populist Party, a radical new movement that basically demanded the government step in and help out the average person. And this wasn't just a Nebraska thing. The ideas that started here would go on to shape national politics for years. Okay, let's jump forward into the 20th century. This was a time of huge social and political change that really created the modern Nebraska. And you could really see the growing divide between rural and city life in something as simple as shopping. Out in the country, you had the general store, right? It was a social hub. Everything was on credit. You'd haggle over prices. But in the city, you got these new department stores. Suddenly, there are fixed price tags, fancy displays, and they're catering specifically to middle-class women. Two totally different worlds. So here's another thing that makes Nebraska totally unique. Why is it the only state that has a single House legislature? You know, a unicameral? Have you ever wondered about that? Well, the answer really comes down to one guy, Senator George W. Norris. He was a big-time progressive, and he made a really simple argument. He said that having two houses in the legislature was just inefficient and expensive, and that it was based on the old, undemocratic British system. And you know what? People listened. In 1934, Nebraskans voted to change their constitution, and they've had that nonpartisan single-house system ever since. Okay, for our last section, we're going to look at the huge changes that happened from World War II all the way to the present day. This is a period that totally transformed Nebraska's economy and its people. World War II was a massive deal for the state. I mean, Nebraska went all in. Farms boosted production to help feed the Allies, huge munitions plants popped up, and the state even hosted dozens of U.S. Army airfields and 23 prisoner-of-war camps. Then, in the later part of the century, you see a totally new kind of migration reshaping the state. Just look at this chart for the town of Lexington. The Hispanic population exploded. It grew by 10 times in just one decade. This was mostly driven by jobs in the meatpacking industry, and it completely revitalized towns like this one. So it really leaves you with this question, right? When you think about it, Nebraska's entire history, from the first indigenous peoples adapting to the land, to the homesteaders, to new immigrants today, it's all been a story of adaptation and migration. So the big question is, how will that long history continue to shape its future? Nebraska's story is just one amazing piece of the larger American puzzle. If you want to see how it fits with its neighbors, you should definitely check out another History in Our U.S. States playlist. And of course, if you enjoyed this explainer, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more just like it.